everyone! Welcome back to my channel, Tosh Can Plant. If you're new to this channel, don't forget to subscribe and like this video if you want to see more plant content. So today I'm going to give you guys 5 tips on how to not kill your houseplants. Just a disclaimer before we begin, I am in no way a plant expert. These are just some tips and tricks that I want to share that have worked for me. So hopefully you find them helpful. If you do, please let me know down in the comments below. And let's get on with the video. So tip number 1, don't follow a watering schedule. When I first started collecting plants about a year ago, I followed a pretty strict watering schedule because when I searched on Google on how to take care of a certain plant, it would say water once a week, water twice a week. So I followed that pretty strictly. I actually had a calendar where I would mark down, oh, I watered this plant this day. So the same day next week, I'm gonna water that plant again. So I'd never checked the soil ever. I just kept watering it, and eventually that led to my plants dying from overwatering. So don't follow a watering schedule. So what I do now is I do different methods to check the soil and to check if my plants need to get watered. So how I check my plants to see if they need to be watered is the finger method. So how the finger method works is you stick your finger about 2 inches into the soil. So for me, it'd be about here on my finger. So I stick it into the soil, and when I pull it out, if it's completely dry or if there's very little soil left on my finger, that means that most probably my plant needs to be watered. And if I pull it out and there's tons of soil on my hand that's stuck to my finger, then it doesn't need to be watered yet. So that's one of the ways that I can tell if my plant needs to be watered, but of course this varies between plants. For example, succulents love to dry out before you water them. So what I usually do for this, for my succulents, is instead of sticking my finger at the top of the soil to check if it's still wet or not, I actually stick it through the drainage hole because it needs to completely dry before watering again. So I stick it through the drainage hole, and same thing, if it's dry, I'll water it. If it's still wet, then I won't. So that's what I do for my succulents, and then for my other plants, I pretty much follow the finger method that I talked about earlier, how I stick it at the top of the soil, and then I go from there. So that's the method that I've been using, and it's been working really well for me. But I did recently purchase a product that can help with that process. So here I have a moisture meter, and I bought this off of Walmart just because Amazon was already out of stock, but it's the same brand, and I'll link it down in the description box. So what you do with this is it's basically the same thing as the finger method, except this will actually tell you if your soil is dry or if it is wet or if it's moist. So it'll tell you exactly what you need to know. Same thing, you stick it in the soil and the meter will go to wet if it is really moist still, so you don't need to water it, and it'll go all the way to red to dry if you need to water it. So I find this to be super helpful, especially if I don't have a lot of time in the day to check all my plants. I can just stick this in each of my plants and figure out which one needs to be watered and which one doesn't need to be. And while we're on the topic of watering, make sure that your pots have drainage holes. So about sometime last year, I had a pot that did not have a drainage hole, and I didn't think anything of it because that's the way I bought it. But that led to my plant dying because when you water the plant and they don't have a drainage hole, there's nowhere for that water to escape. So it's just going to sit in your pot, and it's eventually going to lead to root rot. And if you don't catch root rot at the right time, then your plant is basically done for. So make sure that your pots have drainage holes, super, super important. If you have a pot that you really like that doesn't have a drainage hole, what you can do is you can keep your plant in its nursery pot or the pot that you bought it in, and you can just stick it into the pot that you like without the drainage hole. And every time you need to water it, just take it out, let the water drain through, and then just put it back. So that's one of the ways that you can avoid that problem. My second tip is to make sure you fertilize your plant. So when I first started collecting plants, I did not fertilize any of my plants because I didn't think it was necessary. But fertilizing is super important because it'll give the nutrients that your plants need to grow big and healthy. So for my indoor and my outdoor plants, I use the same type of fertilizer. So it is the Miracle-Gro all-purpose plant food. So I've been using this for a couple of months now and it hasn't given me any problems. And it's a tiny bottle, but it will last you a really long time. So on the back it says, for houseplants, mix 1 teaspoon per gallon of water. So this one lasts really long. So make sure you do your research to figure out how often your plants need to be fertilized, because different plants need to be fertilized different intervals of time. So for example, my tomato plant needs to be fertilized every week, whereas my basil plant needs to be fertilized every 2 weeks. So make sure you do your research on that, but fertilize your plant. The third tip that I have is to monitor your plants regularly for pests and signs of disease. So a lot of my plants have been through a lot. When I bought most of them, they came already with mealybugs, and it was my fault for not checking the plants before I purchased them. But when I brought them home, they were just covered in mealybugs. So basically all of my succulents were covered in mealybugs, so I had to figure out what to do with them, and I honestly would not have caught it if I didn't inspect my plant every day. So some people do it weekly, but I like to do it every day because I've noticed that one day there could be absolutely nothing and then the next day there's something there. And I've noticed that they can multiply pretty quickly, so I like to just check it every day just to make sure that they're doing okay. So in the case of most of the pests that I've dealt with, so I've had to deal with mealybugs, aphids, flea beetles, spider mites, and some other ones that I can't remember the name of. So for most of the cases of these pests, they're really tiny, so most of the time you won't even notice they're there until it becomes a big problem. So make sure that you are checking your plants regularly, and make sure that if you do find that your plant has some type of pest or some type of disease that's starting to spread, make sure you take care of that problem right away, because it will spread throughout that plant and it can also spread to your other plants as well. So what I like to do once I find a pest on my plant, or once I find that type of fungus or some type of disease on my plant, I will take that plant and I will put it as far away as possible from my other plants until I can completely solve the problem on that plant in order to prevent it from spreading to my other plant. So tip number 4 is to do your research and to also listen to your plant. So Google is a great resource to find out what your plant needs. So what you can do is you just type in, for example, you have a cherry tomato plant. So type in on Google how to care for a cherry tomato plant. And don't just stick to one source, look at different sources, go to YouTube, watch a bunch of videos on how to care for that plant, and figure out the best method that you're going to take to care for that plant. Because a lot of different sites will give you different information, so it's up to you to figure out what will work best for you. But besides doing your own research, which again is super important, it's also really important to listen to your plant as well. So for example, I've had plants that I've gotten from a plant nursery where I was told that they could be really good indoor plants, but I noticed that after a month they were just not doing well indoors at all. So I decided to move them outside and they have been doing so much better. But if I did not listen to what my plant needed and I just went by what Google said and what people have been telling me, then my plant would have died. Although it is really good to do your own research, it's also good to listen to your plant and listen to what it needs. So the 5th and final tip I'm going to give is to start with easier plants and then eventually work your way up to more difficult plants to care for. So I know a lot of people, when they start, they want to buy the prettiest plants, which usually are one of the more rare plants or more expensive plants, and those are usually harder to take care of. I know for me, when I first started, I bought a ton of succulents because a lot of people told me it was so easy to care for succulents, but I've learned that it's not really as easy as you think it is, especially for beginner plant owners. So again, start off with easier plants that are harder to kill, and then eventually make your way up to some more complex plants that have a lot of different needs to care for them. And even after you follow all of these tips, if your plant still dies after that, don't be discouraged. I still kill some plants sometimes, even though I do my research and I do everything that I think I need to be doing. It is, again, a trial and error process, and it is a learning process. So you are going to have plants that die on you, but don't give up. It will get better and it will get easier as you learn more about your plants. So I hope that you guys found these tips helpful. Obviously, there are a lot of other things that you can do to prevent your plant from dying, but these are the 5 that I thought would be the most beneficial for you guys and the ones that I have found to be the most beneficial to me. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you liked it, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more plant content. I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!